Good day. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek, philosopher, historian, and noted Thomas Jefferson scholar. And today I'd like to talk to you about the avowed relationship between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, specifically about the declaration in June of 2018 that Thomas Jefferson fathered all of Sally Hemings' children is factual. Which was a pretty astounding reversal from their prior claim that it was just probable. So the title of this presentation is A Singular Singularity, a Fact in Need of Justification. Like I said, in June of 2018, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, headed by Leslie Bowman, declared it factual that Thomas Jefferson fathered all six of Sally Hemings' children. He may have fathered more, for all we know. And what's striking about the claim is, claiming it to be a fact is facts are things known to be true or claims known to be true by appeal to experience, usually of the observational sort. If I know something as a fact, I appeal to find out if something is a fact. I need to appeal only to experience. If I say it's cloudy outside in southern Lynchburg, I happen to be in southern Lynchburg, another happens to be there, the person can corroborate that claim by looking outside, looking up in the heavens. If indeed it is cloudy, it's a fact. You don't need to do anything else. Yet the Thomas Jefferson Foundation has gone the distance and offered 10 separate independent arguments for their fact. That's really weird, given that when we know something to be factual, we don't argue for it, right? We can directly observe its truth. Now let's look at these arguments that are given by the foundation and evaluate them, look at them in a piecemeal fashion. They say Madison Hemings provided an account of his mother's life that was published in an Ohio newspaper in 1873. The basic outline of Madison Hemings' account, including his mother's treaty with Jefferson and the freedom granted to him and his siblings, was well known to his community before it was published. His narrative is the most important extant evidence, and much of the corroborating evidence supports the outline in his narrative. Indeed, this narrative published in the Ohio newspaper in 1783 is the most important piece of evidence. At least that's what the foundation thinks, and that's certainly what Annette Gordon-Reed has said on numerous occasions. Yet, those who have examined the account of Madison's testimony would be thrown out of a court of law today because it's flawed for a number of reasons. First, Madison was born in 1805, and he's talking about events, most of which occurred prior to 1805, like what happened between his mother and Thomas Jefferson while Jefferson was in Paris and Sally Hemings was in Paris, and Jefferson was in Paris from 1784 to 1789, and Sally Hemings only came over about 3 years into Jefferson's tenure in France, in Paris, France. And Jefferson didn't even know Sally was coming. He wanted to bring his Maria, because his other daughter had died, and he wanted to bring Maria over. He asked for an elderly slave to come, a reliable person, an older woman who would take care of her. And what happened is Sally Hemings, who was very, very young at the time, was sent with Maria. Okay, so first, the account is massively flawed in that Madison Hemings' testimony, right as hearsay. It's not direct, it's indirect testimony, so it'd be thrown out of a court of law. And it flies in the face of other evidence, direct evidence. For example, the plantation's overseer, Edmund Bacon, and his testimony, he put down his observations, and Merrill Peterson collected them in a book, and his observations, his testimony must be taken quite seriously, and it's not. He says, talking about one of Sally Hemings' daughters, she was not his daughter, she was blank's, and we don't know what that blank is, but clearly he's asserting that Jefferson was not the father of one of Sally Hemings' children. So why are we not taking seriously Bacon's testimony? Is it because he was a white scholar? That just does not seem to make a lot of sense. Okay. Secondly, they write, the Foster et al. 1998 DNA study revealed that male line descendants of Eston Hemings, son of Sally Hemings, and male line descendants of Field Jefferson's father, who was Thomas Jefferson's grandfather, shared the same Y chromosome haplotype. This demonstrates that Eston's father was a Jefferson male. The result not only corroborates Madison's account in the Plain County Republican, that's a newspaper to which I referred, it definitely refutes the claims by Jefferson's grandchildren, including Ellen Randolph Coolidge and her brother Thomas Jefferson Randolph, that either Peter or Samuel Carr, they could not agree on which one, was the father of Sally Hemings' children. Now, this, again, is flawed from a number of perspectives. Let's assume that there were no flaws in the methodology of the DNA study. What that shows is that A. Jefferson was the father of Eston Hemings. And that could be Thomas Jefferson, it could be Jefferson's brother, it could be the children of Jefferson's brother. Okay, but that is only evidence of the line of Eston Hemings. The other children were not tested. And there is the assumption that Sally Hemings was not promiscuous. We know her mother was promiscuous. Why wouldn't Sally be promiscuous? In other words, have more than one lover. I don't know that she did. I don't know that she didn't. But the line of reasoning employed here assumes that there was only one paramour and goes on to say it was Thomas Jefferson. Now, a number of scholars, myself included, go on to think that the father of Eston Hemings was Jefferson's brother, a junior by a number of years, Randolph Jefferson. We know that he frequently visited Monticello, and he frequented the slaves' quarters. And Isaac Jefferson, one of the slaves, said, "Old master's brother, Mass Randall, was a mighty simple man, used to come out among black people, play the fiddle and dance half the night, hadn't much more sense than Isaac." And that's one direct testimony of Randolph Jefferson visiting the slave quarters often. Okay, now that the claim here is that we need to rule out the Carrs conclusively because of the DNA that we got with Eston Hemings. Sally Hemings was promiscuous. The Carrs could readily have fathered other children with Sally Hemings. Okay, so we just can't rule that out by fiat. Here's their third reason. Madison Hemings was described by a U.S. Census taker as the son of Thomas Jefferson in 1870. Well, yawn. I don't know what to say about that. Why that should be even included, it means nothing. It's not like census. If it's census taker says it, it has to be law. Come on. Fourth, Israel Gillette Jefferson, formerly enslaved at Monticello, corroborated Madison Hemings' claim in the same newspaper, referring to Sally Hemings as Thomas Jefferson's concubine. Now, Israel was born in 1800, and he claimed to be a waiter at Monticello, claimed to be Thomas Jefferson's personal assistant at the time of Jefferson's second term. That means that his Jefferson's personal assistant, by the time from 1805 to 1809, early 1809, would have been a very, very young boy, someone from 5 to 8 years of age during that tenure, and that just seems ridiculous that Jefferson would have employed. He also claimed to recall distinctly that Jefferson's departure, and that seems Jefferson's departure from Monticello to go on to Washington, D.C., and that is bogus as well. Okay. Eston Hemings, they say, for the fifth argument, changed his racial identity to white and his surname to Jefferson after moving from Ohio to Wisconsin in 1852. Newspaper accounts in Chillicothe, Ohio in 1887 and 1902 recall that Eston resembled Thomas Jefferson. Now, Is there anything really strange that Eston would spread the story that he's the son of Thomas Jefferson if he moved when he was in Chillicothe? Would that have been a golden ticket? Wouldn't I like to say that I'm in Thomas Jefferson's bloodline, or if I were, living at that time, I was the son of Thomas Jefferson? That would have been a golden ticket of sorts, right? Now, what of the resemblance? And that we need to take rather seriously. Jefferson's grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, acknowledged that there was a similarity between Thomas Jefferson and the Hemings' male children. I quote from Thomas Jefferson Randolph: "She had children which resembled Mr. Jefferson so closely that it was plain that they had his blood in their veins." He says, "One child at some distance or in the dusk, dressed in the same way, might have been mistaken for Mr. Jefferson." Okay. Now, the resemblance is explicable by Jefferson being the father, or by Randolph being the father, someone in the bloodline. Certainly, Randolph could have looked quite a bit like Thomas in many respects, and that would explain the resemblance as well. By another Jefferson being a father, explain the resemblance. But notice the qualifiers that Thomas Jefferson Randolph says: at some distance and in the dusk. So we need to be cautious about the resemblance. The resemblance was probably a faint resemblance, not a striking resemblance. Otherwise, the qualifiers at some distance and in the dusk would not have been added. The sixth argument: the two oldest surviving children of Sally Hemings, Beverly Hemings, a male, and Harriet Hemings, were both allowed to leave Monticello without pursuit and were described as runaway in Jefferson's inventory of slave families. In an 1858 letter to her husband, Joseph Coolidge, Jefferson's granddaughter, Ellen Wales Randolph Coolidge, while denying Jefferson's paternity, described Sally Hemings' children as all fair and all set free at my grandfather's death, or had been suffered to absent themselves permanently before he died. Okay, now the Hemings children certainly had privileged status at Monticello. They came to Jefferson's household from his wife Martha Wales Skeleton as an inheritance from their father John Wales. All had light duties or important duties at Monticello. All were significantly light-skinned, and probably most could have passed for white in Virginian culture. Now, to say that they were privileged is not indeed proof of Jefferson's paternity, but they were privileged in the Wales line, and in Jefferson brought them into Monticello. He certainly, because of his love of his wife, privileged them in his household. 7. Jefferson's records of his travels and birthdays of Sally Hemings' children revealed that he was present at Monticello during the estimated dates of conception for all 6 of Hemings' documented offspring. Statistical modeling shows the likelihood of the coincidence for any other male, if we assume that Thomas Jefferson is not the father, as 1% or 1 chance in 100, strong evidence of Thomas Jefferson's paternity. Now, this argument, using Monte Carlo methods, computerized simulation modeling, is essaying to show that there is 1 chance in 100 that Thomas Jefferson is not the father of all 6. That's a strong and remarkable probabilistic claim that there's a 99% chance that Jefferson is the father of all of Sally Hemings' children. The problem with that is that the argument gained such strength because of the evidence put into the Bayesian frame. If you put in the right sort of evidence, you're going to get the outcome that's desirable. If you neglect certain relevant evidence and don't put it in the equation, of course, that would have weakened the argument. You're going to get a strong argument. So let's assume that Jefferson was present at Monticello 9 months each time prior to the Sally Hemings' birth of the children. Does that show that he was the father? Now, that's a necessary condition for him to be the father on presumption that Sally Hemings was at Monticello at the time. We have no idea where she was. I mean, it's likely that in any one of those times she was at Monticello, But can we say for certain that she was there all 6 times? We certainly cannot. That's factored into the equation that Sally Hemings was there. So, we can't. What we're doing here is we're taking as a necessary condition something to be a sufficient condition. Jefferson would have had to have been around at Monticello, and Sally Hemings would have had to have been around at Monticello each one of those times for him to be the father, to make an argument for him to be the father of all the children, right? But we know nothing of Sally Hemings' position, but still it does not prevent other people from being the father. What about Randolph? Was Randolph present on each occasion? Was Randolph present on some occasions when Jefferson was home? Was Sally Hemings promiscuous? She might have had sex with Randolph on a couple occasions, and some of the children might be Randolph's, and some of the children might be the Carr's children. Some of the children might be Randolph's son's children. Too much is made of this Monte Carlo model, and it doesn't prove what it aims to prove. It proves only that because of the information put into the equation, into the Bayesian theorem, and the information left out. 8. Oral tradition connecting the Hemings and Jefferson families was transmitted among the descendants of both Madison Hemings and Eston Hemings over many generations. Madison Hemings calls Jefferson his father in his 1783 recollections, a fact repeated by his descendants. Eston Hemings' descendants altered their family history to state that they were related to one of Thomas Jefferson's relatives in order to hide Eston Hemings' decision to change his racial identity when he moved to Wisconsin. Now, oral tradition. Oral traditions we know are not reliable. There was the strongest oral tradition was the Thomas Woodson line. Woodson claimed to be fathered by Thomas Jefferson, and the DNA evidence showed Woodson was not fathered by Thomas Jefferson. So that's strong. The strongest of all oral tradition line had been ruled out. Now, that Madison Hemings' children should repeat the story that Madison Hemings gave, that Jefferson was his father. Is that at all astonishing? If Madison reports it in the paper at some point, perhaps bogusly, and I think it was bogus, that his children should repeat the story. Why would they want to contradict their father? Okay, there's another account. Julia Westerinen, a descendant of Sally Hemings, asserts that there was an oral tradition that she was descended from Jefferson's uncle. And it happened to be biographer Fawn Brodie, whose work on Jefferson came out in 1976. Brodie convinced her that she was related to Jefferson and not to Jefferson's uncle. So, again, we have scholars interfering in the oral tradition here. What all this shows is oral history is not very, very reliable. 9th, Jefferson freed all surviving Hemings children in accordance with the terms of his negotiation with Sally Hemings, as reported by her son Madison. He did not grant freedom to any other enslaved nuclear family. Okay, first off, there's absolutely no evidence other than Madison Hemings' testimony in 1783 that there were any negotiations between Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson while they were in France. And it seems presumptuous that someone who was who was such a young woman at the time would have the presence of mind or the daring to negotiate with Thomas Jefferson. And that only makes sense on presumption that he had her as his lover, which I think just never happened. Now, Betty, who was Sally's mother, was half white and may have been the mistress of John Wales, as it says in the testimony, but that's part of the oral tradition given us, and that tradition goes back to Madison Hemings. Okay, it's without confirmation, so we can't even say that Betty Hemings, was the mistress of Wales, even though that tends to be the accepted scholarly view. Okay, now the Hemings children were lightly colored, that much we know, and they were, given sufficient skills, usually light skills, and the men in the line were given skills enough to enable them to work in the white community if they presumably that they could pass for white, so they could integrate in white society. Nothing is made of the fact that Sally Hemings wasn't freed. Why wasn't Sally Hemings freed? That seems kind of strange. So the fact that they were released in a society, Thomas Jefferson was very cautious about releasing slaves because, for one, where are you going to go? What, you know, the books are, the history books neglect one important thing. It just seems, okay, when slaves are freed, everything is fantastic. Hell no. Oftentimes things, you know, especially if you don't have sufficient skills, where are you going to go? If you're dark colored, you're not going to integrate very, very smoothly in white northern society. You're going to have a hellish existence over there. You know, and if you don't have sufficient skills to integrate in white society, it's just not going to be easy. So that's another problem. Okay, the last argument. The names of Sally Hemings' 4 surviving children, William Beverly Hemings, Harriet Hemings, James Madison Hemings, and Thomas Eston Hemings, suggest family ties to Thomas Jefferson. Annette Gordon Reed, right, outlines these naming connections in her book, Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings, and American Controversy. A man named William Beverly accompanied Jefferson's father on an expedition through Virginia in 1746, and he was connected to Jefferson's mother's family by blood and marriage. There were multiple Harriets in the Randolph family, including a sister and a niece of Thomas Mann Randolph, Jefferson's son-in-law. Madison Hemings was named at the request of Dolly Madison, whose husband, James Madison, was one of Jefferson's closest friends. Historian and biographer Fawn Brodie offered 2 possible explanations for Eston Hemings' name. Eston was the birthplace of Jefferson's maternal ancestor, William Randolph of Yorkshire, England. Thomas Eston Randolph was also a first cousin of Jefferson. Jefferson described the 2 families as being almost as one. Furthermore, it was convention for Jefferson to be involved in the naming of family members. His children with Martha Jefferson were given the names of his sisters and mother, and he personally named each of his grandchildren. Now, notice the terminology here. The names suggest that something is suggestive of another thing is really wholly uninformative. If I say X suggests Y, not very interesting, is it? What if I said X implies Y? Well, that's tremendously interesting because there's the relationship not merely of not a suggested relationship, but there's the relationship of implication. X is the cause of Y, likewise, is a tremendously important assertion because I'm asserting a causal relationship of some sort, that X is a sufficient or necessary cause of Y or some probabilistic cause of Y, some such thing. Now, the fact that Dolly Madison begged the privilege of naming me, said Madison Hemings, that's what he said in his report. Of course, here again, he wasn't around, just being born, and that Dolly Madison begged the privilege. Now we know that she probably was in Washington at the time of Madison's birth, but if not, why would she care what the young boy's name is going to be? She's going to be begging for them to name after her. That seems to be an enormous stretch. So what have we found? Here's where we sort of sum up the casuistry, as it were. We have a fact, a statement known to be true by appeal to observation or experience, given rational justification, which doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. If something's factual, you don't need to argue for it. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation is arguing for it. There's something mightily, enormously suspicious about arguing for facts. Okay, I'll go back to those of you who remember, back in the 60s and 70s, there was something that was going around talking about the coincidence between Kennedy's life and Abraham Lincoln's life, John F. Kennedy's life. And they went on to talk about 10 coincidences, which was supposed to be rather startling. One of which is each last name had the same number of letters, which Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln made by Ford. Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. Kennedy has 7 letters, so too does Lincoln. 8 letters, so too does Lincoln, and so forth and so on. So you get a number of these really supposedly startling coincidences. what are we supposed to conclude from that? You can take any two random people. You can take Thomas Jefferson and Barack Obama. And if you do enough digging, given that there are multiple and multiple trillions upon trillions upon trillions of facts related to each person, with enough digging you can come up with 10. You can come up probably with 10,000 really startling coincidences. What are you supposed to draw from that? We're supposed to say that Lincoln and Kennedy were spiritually connected, that Kennedy was the reincarnation of Lincoln. None of this makes a lot of sense. So, in closing, I just want to say that we need to be very, very careful about the claims of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation that Jefferson. It's a fact that Jefferson was the father of all of Sally Hemings' children. The very fact that they offer arguments, and a number of them is evidence that something spooky is going on. And again, there's something in logic. It was widely practiced in Jefferson's day and in antiquity that if you wanted to show something to be true, you gave a large number of arguments for it, and that seems sensible. But when you study logic, and I've taught logic for 30-something years of teaching, on numerous occasions, if I have a strong argument for something, right, if the Bayes argument really showed that there's a 99% chance that Jefferson and his father all were children, then the other arguments would be de trop, would be superfluous. The fact that they've given you so many different arguments for Jefferson's paternity, which is quote-unquote a fact, is itself something suspicious. So I hope you learned something from this, and we need reasoned debate and open-minded debate on this issue at Monticello. That's precisely what they disallow. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope you learned something from that. And again, the best we can say is we really don't know. I'm inclined to say, and I believe this with my whole heart, there was no relationship between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. He wasn't interested in making love to a 14-year-old girl who arrived in France. His taste in women was not only beauty, and Sally Hemings was a child. She's supposed to be beautiful, but sophistication. He liked women who were really well-schooled in the fine arts, as was his wife, as was Maria Cosway. Farewell. Hope you enjoyed the presentation.